We slowly move through 2nd John because we're just going verse by verse right now because it's so brief. And our next verse is verse 5. But now, dear lady, and that's referring to the church, not an individual woman. Now, dear lady, I ask you, not as though I were writing you a new commandment, but one we have had from the beginning, let us love one another. And again, this is hearkening back to the first letter of John, where we heard extensively in chapter 3 and chapter 4 about the importance of loving one another, how it's the evidence of our faith. That's what walking in the truth looks like for John. It's that we are loving one another. We're loving the other members of the church. We're loving members of our family. We're loving our neighbors. And we're loving, as Jesus taught in his Sermon on the Mount, we're even loving our enemies. Love one another. It's in some ways, if you read through the New Testament at this particular juncture, you're almost ready to say, enough already. How many times do you have to tell us to love one another? We get it. But do we really? I mean, every day, it's so easy to fall short of loving one another with that agape, self-sacrificing, seeking the other's good kind of love that the New Testament calls us to. And yet, just like yesterday I mentioned how the word truth is mentioned 5 times in the first 4 verses, love is mentioned 4 times in the first 6 verses. These are just pillars of our faith. Love one another, love one another, love one another. If you have a relationship that is not at the best place right now, John would tell you, love one another. If you have a relationship where you're unsure what the next step is, love one another. You know, on your computer, it has kind of default settings for like your email and what the font will be and the typeface and that sort of thing. That there's a default. I think on my computer email, the default is like Calibri 11 or something. Well, in the New Testament, and for you and for me as Christians, we have a default. And that default is love one another. Whenever you're confused, if you're uncertain, you don't know what to do, you don't know how to respond to another person, if things are going great, love one another. If things are confused, love one another. If things are difficult, love one another. If you're grieving, hurting, whatever the situation, our default setting as followers of Jesus, as he says in John chapter 13, verses 33 and 34, is to love one another. And it's by this that everyone will know that you are a disciple of Christ. Wherever you go this day, every situation you find yourself in, hear that phrase echoing in your mind, love one another.